The storm wasn't just rain, it was judgment. It hammered the small homestead like God himself was trying to beat it back into the dirt. Inside, a sound worse than the thunder. The weak, gasping cry of a 6-month-old baby. Grace Whitman was burning up. Her skin was hot to the touch, her tiny body writhing in a fever that was stealing her life, breath by tiny breath. Over her stood Adelaide Sinclair, her fingers moving fast, tearing strips from her own petticoat. She plunged them in cool water, wrung them out, and laid them on the baby's forehead. A desperate, losing battle. In the doorway, the baby's father, Nathaniel Whitman, was a statue carved from fear. His big, calloused hands, hands that could tame a horse or build a barn, were useless. They clutched a little wooden toy, forgotten. "The doctor," he choked out, his voice cracking. Adelaide didn't even look up from the dying child. "No time." Her voice was ice. She pulled a small bottle from a worn leather bag, 3 drops into a spoonful of water, a motion with her head. "Hold her." Nathaniel moved like a man in a trance, his giant hands cradling his daughter's head. Adelaide tipped the liquid between the baby's lips. The child sputtered, then swallowed. For 3 hours they fought. Adelaide was a general, Nathaniel her soldier. Cold compresses, tinctures, a steady hand checking the fading pulse. He was watching a stranger he'd bought for $20 just 3 weeks before. A woman sold to him as a cook and a cleaner, but this was no housekeeper. This was something else entirely. As the baby's breathing finally evened out, Adelaide collapsed into a chair. Her hands, so steady just moments ago, began to shake uncontrollably. A bolt of lightning lit the room, a flash of pure white. And in that instant, Nathaniel saw it. The thing she always kept hidden under her long sleeves. A terrible, jagged scar, running from her wrist almost to her elbow. Their eyes met across the dim room. "A secret for a secret, Mr. Whitman," she whispered, her voice barely there. "I know why you were really at that auction." 3 weeks earlier, the sun was a hammer over the dusty town square of Roe Creek. Adelaide Sinclair stood on a wooden platform, the auction block. Humiliation burned through her veins, but her chin was high. She stared at the horizon, refusing to meet the eyes of the crowd. They were whispering, laughing. Frank Turner, the auctioneer, yelled out her faults like he was selling livestock. "She can't bear children," he shouted, and the crowd chuckled. "But she can cook, clean, and sew. Educated, too. Reads and writes better than most men here." More laughter. Her brother-in-law, Victor Caldwell, stood off to the side, a smug little smile on his thin lips. After her husband William died in the mine collapse, Victor had taken everything. The house, the medical tools, even her wedding ring. All to pay off debts she never knew existed. When there was nothing left, he declared her cursed, a barren woman who brought death. $8, someone yelled. $7 if she can bake a pie. The laughter was a physical blow. Adelaide dug her nails into her palms. She had survived the war. She had held dying men together. She would survive this. Then a voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. $20 in silver. Every head turned. At the edge of the crowd stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a dark beard and stern eyes. In his arms he held a small bundle. It was Nathaniel Whitman, the rancher from out on Rose Creek, the one whose wife had died in childbirth last winter. Adelaide finally let her gaze drop from the horizon. She looked at him. He wasn't sneering. He wasn't assessing her like a piece of meat. There was something else in his eyes. Recognition. He was looking for her. "Sold!" Turner's gavel cracked like a whip, sealing her fate. As Nathaniel approached the platform, she saw the bundle in his arms was a baby. His daughter, Grace. He looked up at her, his voice low. "You're not merchandise, ma'am, but I have a daughter who needs care, and a promise to keep." And as they rode away in his wagon, Adelaide saw Victor watching them go. The smug look was gone, replaced by something cold, calculating, a look that promised this was far from over. The ranch was quiet, a different world from the cruelty of the town. Nathaniel had given her a room, wages, a choice. You'll be my housekeeper and Grace's nurse, he'd said, if you're willing. If not, I'll help you get wherever you want to go. A choice. It was a luxury she hadn't had in a long time. The house was a man's house, messy but solid. A home that had known love but was now drowning in grief. And in the center of it all was Grace, the tiny, solemn baby who stared at Adelaide with knowing eyes. The first time Adelaide held her, the baby's fussing stopped. She just watched. Then her tiny hand reached up and grabbed a lock of Adelaide's hair, holding on tight. She likes you, Nathaniel had said, his voice full of surprise. Adelaide fell into a routine. Cooking, cleaning, caring for Grace. Nathaniel was a ghost, gone before dawn, back after dusk. They barely spoke. It was an arrangement. It was safe. But the questions wouldn't leave her alone. Why had he really bought her? What was this promise he had to keep? The house held secrets. In his study, amongst the farming journals, were medical textbooks. Gray's Anatomy, books a simple rancher would have no use for. On the mantel, a photo of a beautiful, dark-haired woman, Sophia, his late wife. Her smile was full of joy, her hand resting on a pregnant belly. It was a life Adelaide would never have. A few days later, a visitor arrived. An old man on horseback named Calvin Porter, their nearest neighbor. He had shrewd blue eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at Adelaide and nodded. "You have a nurse's posture," he said. The words hit her like a physical blow. "Battlefield nurse, I'd wager, during the war." Adelaide's blood ran cold. How could he possibly know? Calvin just tapped his temple. "Served as a medical sergeant? You learn to spot your own kind." Then he gestured toward Nathaniel, who had gone stiff. "Just like our Nate here. He wasn't always a cattle rancher." A thick, heavy silence fell. Nathaniel's eyes flashed a warning. But the seed was planted. The mystery of Nathaniel Whitman grew deeper. That night, the restlessness was too much. Adelaide lit a lamp and picked up an old book of poetry, William's last gift to her. As she opened it, a folded piece of paper slipped out. It wasn't hers. The handwriting was feminine. The ink faded. It began, "My dearest Inen." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she read. "If you are reading this, I have left you to raise our child alone. I must ask one more promise of you. Find Adelaide Sinclair." Adelaide's hands began to shake. "She is the nurse who saved your brother at Antietam. William Sinclair's wife. She is my cousin." The letter was signed, "With eternal love, S. Sophia." But that wasn't the biggest shock. The letter continued. "I believe she is in Roe Creek. Get to her before Victor does. He is not what he seems. William's death was no accident." A knock at her door made her jump. She shoved the letter under her pillow just as Nathaniel opened the door. "Grace is unsettled," he said, his face etched with worry. In the nursery, Grace was wailing. But Adelaide's mind was a whirlwind. William's death was no accident. She picked up the baby, her movements automatic, and began to hum an old lullaby. A song she used to sing with her cousin Sarah, who became Sophia Whitman, who was now dead. "Sarah used to love this song," she said, the words a challenge. Nathaniel flinched. "You found the letter." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said, her voice tight. "You knew who I was, the whole time. The auction, it was all a charade." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know how else to get you away from him, from Victor." The letter had said to get to her before Victor did. What did she mean, Nathaniel? William's death was no accident. He looked away, his jaw tight. Sophia was worried before she died. She said Victor's story about the debts didn't add up. William was meticulous with his finances. She thought Victor was lying. Adelaide felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She had believed Victor's lies. She had let him strip her of everything because she was drowning in grief. But if he was lying about the debts, what else was he lying about? The mind collapse, she whispered. He said it was a freak accident. Sophia didn't think so, Nathaniel said grimly. She thought Victor had something to do with it, but she had no proof. And then she got sick so quickly. He looked at his sleeping daughter. Her last wish was for me to find you, to protect you and Grace. She said you were the only one strong enough. Strong enough for what? The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. Victor hadn't just been greedy, he was a killer, and he had wanted her gone, sold, discredited, silenced. He knows, Adelaide said, the realization dawning on her. He thinks I know something. Nathaniel met her gaze, his eyes dark with a resolve she hadn't seen before. Then we have to find out what it is, before he comes back for you. The days that followed were charged with a new, dangerous energy. The polite distance between Adelaide and Nathaniel vanished, replaced by the grim intimacy of co-conspirators. Every quiet moment was spent talking, trying to piece together the puzzle of William's death and Sophia's fears. They searched the house from top to bottom, looking for anything Sophia might have hidden. A journal, a letter, any clue. They found nothing. It was as if Sophia's fears had died with her. Life had to go on. Adelaide cared for Grace, the sweet baby, a constant, innocent reminder of what was at stake. Nathaniel worked the ranch, but his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, watching for a threat he knew was coming. The fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a buggy. A striking woman with auburn hair and a fiery red shawl introduced herself as Rebecca Martinez, the town midwife, Sophia's best friend. Her eyes were sharp, assessing Adelaide, assessing the whole situation. Sophia was afraid, Rebecca said, after Nathaniel had explained the situation in hushed tones. In her last weeks, she was terrified. She kept talking about Victor. She said he was a snake and that he'd poisoned everything he touched. Rebecca looked from Nathaniel to Adelaide. She made me promise I would watch over Grace. And you, she said, looking at Nathaniel, she said you carried too many ghosts from the war to see the danger right in front of you. Another piece of the puzzle, another secret. What ghosts? Adelaide asked, looking at Nathaniel. But he just shook his head, his expression closed off. Rebecca sighed. Nathaniel has his own secrets, Mrs. Sinclair, ones he doesn't even share with old friends. Before she left, Rebecca extended an invitation to a town gathering. You can't hide out here forever, she insisted. You need to show this town you're not afraid. You need allies. It was a risk. Going into town meant making themselves a target, but staying on the isolated ranch felt just as dangerous. They were sitting ducks. We'll go, Adelaide said, her voice firm. If Victor was coming, she would not be found cowering in the shadows. She would face him in the light of day, surrounded by people who would be forced to bear witness. She would not be a victim again. The decision was made. They were walking into the lion's den, and they had no idea if they would walk out again. The morning of the town gathering, a strange sort of calm settled over the house. Adelaide, dressed in her best navy gown, a gift from Nathaniel, a dark blue ribbon woven in her hair. She looked in the mirror and saw not the broken widow from the auction block, but a woman preparing for battle. Nathaniel wore his Sunday best, looking less like a rancher and more like the man of substance he clearly once was, the man Calvin Porter and Rebecca Martinez hinted at. He held Grace on his hip, and for a moment, they looked like a family, a real family, bracing for a storm. The ride to town was silent, the air thick with unspoken fears. As they approached Roe Creek, the memories of her humiliation came rushing back. But this time was different. She wasn't alone. She had Nathaniel by her side. She had Grace in her arms. She had a purpose. They arrived at Rebecca's house, a cheerful place with a garden full of people. The conversation stopped as they entered. Every eye was on them. Rebecca made the introductions, her voice loud and clear. Mrs. Adelaide Sinclair, she announced, Sophia's cousin. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. This changed everything. She wasn't just the hired help. She was family. An elegant woman named Esther, another of Sophia's friends, approached. Sophia never mentioned a cousin, she said, her tone skeptical. We lost touch during the war, Adelaide explained, the lie smooth on her tongue. We believed each other dead. Esther's expression softened. How tragic, and how wonderful that you're here for her child. It was working. They were building a wall of support, one person at a time. But then a figure appeared at the garden gate, a man in a deputy's uniform. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She knew him, James Miller, the young lieutenant from Antietam, the one whose arm she had saved from a surgeon's saw. He was the law in this town. His eyes scanned the crowd and landed on her and Nathaniel. He walked toward them, his face grim. "Mr. Whitman, Mrs. Sinclair," he said, his voice low. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have some bad news." The garden went silent. Everyone was listening. "Victor Caldwell is in town," Miller said. "He's at the saloon, telling anyone who'll listen that you," he looked at Adelaide, "belong to him. He says the sale was illegal. He has a contract signed by your late husband, making him your legal guardian." It was a lie. It had to be a lie. William would never sign such a thing. Nathaniel's hand found the small of her back, a steady, grounding pressure. "That's a lie," he said, his voice a low growl. "Then you'd better find a way to prove it," Miller said, his eyes full of regret. "Because right now, according to the law, he has the right to take her. And there's not a damn thing I can do to stop him." The world tilted. The cheerful garden, the friendly faces, it all faded into a blur of sound and color. Victor was here, and he had the law on his side. Rebecca ushered them into her parlor, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Deputy Miller looked miserable. "I don't like it any more than you do," he said, "but the contract looks legitimate. The signature matches other samples of Dr. Sinclair's." "It's a forgery," Adelaide insisted, her voice shaking. "Victor is a liar and a thief." "Maybe so, ma'am," Miller said gently, "but a territorial judge won't see it that way without proof, and Victor is demanding you be returned to his custody. Tonight." Nathaniel stepped forward, his body shielding Adelaide's. "That's not going to happen." There was a cold fury in his eyes that Adelaide had never seen before. This wasn't just a rancher. This was a man who knew violence. "If Caldwell wants her, he has to come through me." Miller sighed. "Don't do anything foolish, Whitman. He's stirring up trouble, painting you as a man who bought a woman and is now refusing to give her back to her rightful family. People are listening." The trap was closing. Victor wasn't just trying to reclaim her. He was trying to destroy them. He was turning the town against them, using the law as his weapon. He was isolating them, just like he did to her after William died. Rebecca, ever practical, took charge. "You can't go back to the ranch. It's too isolated. He could come for you in the night. You'll stay here, with me." It was a temporary solution, a flimsy shield against the storm that was about to break. As night fell, the mood in Rebecca's small house grew heavy with dread. Every sound from the street outside made them jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Nathaniel paced the small parlor like a caged animal. "There has to be something," he muttered. "Some piece of evidence Sophia missed." Adelaide's mind was racing, sifting through memories of her last months with William. He had been distracted, worried, working long hours at the mine. He'd said it was just a new vein they were exploring. But what if it was something else? "The mine," she said suddenly. "Nathaniel, he was spending so much time at the mine before he died. He said he was consulting on ventilation, but he looked haunted." Nathaniel stopped pacing. What if he found something? Something Victor was doing? It made a terrible kind of sense. The fraudulent debts, the forged contract, the murder disguised as an accident. It was all a cover-up. William hadn't just died. He had been silenced. And whatever he had discovered was the key. "His journals," Adelaide whispered, a frantic hope rising in her chest. William kept detailed journals of all his work, medical cases, consultations, everything. Victor took all his medical supplies, but I never saw the journals. A frantic search of her meager belongings yielded nothing. Victor must have taken them. They were gone. The only proof they had was gone. Just then a heavy pounding rattled the front door. It was an aggressive, demanding sound. Victor. He was done waiting. He had come to collect his property, and this time he hadn't come alone. Nathaniel opened the door to find Victor Caldwell standing on the porch, flanked by two rough-looking men from the saloon. Victor's thin lips were curved in a triumphant smirk. "Evening, Whitman," he said, his eyes flicking past him to Adelaide. "I've come from my sister-in-law. The deputy informed me of your reluctance, so I brought friends." "She's not going anywhere with you, Caldwell," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously calm. He stood in the doorway, blocking their path. He was bigger than all three of them, but the odds weren't good. Now, Victor tutted. There's no need for unpleasantness. The law's on my side. Or would you rather we settle this another way? A way that might leave your pretty little farmhouse nothing but a pile of ash? It was a direct threat. He was threatening not just them, but Grace. He was threatening to burn them out, to destroy everything. From behind Nathaniel, Adelaide's voice rang out, clear and steady. I want to see the contract, Victor. Surprise flickered across his face. He hadn't expected her to speak. He produced the document with a flourish. Adelaide took it, her eyes scanning the paper. The signature was a near-perfect forgery. But there was one small detail he'd gotten wrong. A detail only she would know. This is a fake, she said, her voice filled with contempt. William always signed his name William D. Sinclair. He was proud of his middle name, David. This just says William Sinclair. You're a fool, Victor, and a clumsy one at that. Victor's smirk faltered. He lunged for the paper, but Adelaide was faster. She held it up. This proves nothing in court, but it proves to me you're a liar. Just then, Deputy Miller arrived, his face flushed. Caldwell, I told you to wait. I've waited long enough, Victor snarled. She's coming with me. The two thugs behind him tensed, their hands moving toward the pistols tucked in their belts. The standoff was about to explode into violence. Suddenly, another voice cut through the tension, an old, steady voice from the edge of the porch. It was Calvin Porter, Nathaniel's neighbor. He was holding a shotgun, and it was aimed squarely at Victor's chest. I think the lady's made her choice, Calvin said, his blue eyes like chips of ice. And I think you and your friends ought to head back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Victor stared at the shotgun, his face pale. He had miscalculated. He had assumed Nathaniel was an isolated rancher with no friends, no support. He was wrong. The town was no longer on his side. He had pushed too far. He backed away slowly, his eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, he hissed at Adelaide. You have something that belongs to me, and I will get it back. Then he and his men melted back into the darkness. The immediate danger was over, but his last words hung in the air like a death sentence. You have something that belongs to me. He wasn't just after her. He was after something else, something William had left behind, something worth killing for. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the parlor felt small and suffocating. The air was thick with adrenaline and fear. Calvin Porter stood by the window, his shotgun still resting in the crook of his arm, watching the street. He won't be back tonight, he said, but he'll be back. Nathaniel was staring at Adelaide, a new question in his eyes. What did he mean? You have something that belongs to me? Adelaide racked her brain, her thoughts frantic. I don't know. He took everything. William's instruments, his books, my jewelry. Everything of value is gone. She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. It was hopeless. They had no proof, just the word of a dead woman and a forged signature. Victor held all the cards. Then she remembered something. A small thing, insignificant at the time. His bag, she said, looking up. The day of the mine collapse, he didn't have his medical bag with him. He always took it everywhere. I asked Victor about it, and he said it must have been lost in the collapse. But that didn't make sense. William was a doctor. His bag was like a part of his body. He wouldn't have gone into a mine without it. What if it wasn't lost? Nathaniel said, the pieces clicking into place. What if he gave it to someone, for safekeeping? They looked at each other, the same thought dawning on them both. There was one place William might have left it, a place Victor would never think to look, a place only a fellow doctor would know to respect. The memory hit Adelaide like a physical blow, a conversation from years ago, during the war. She and William were working alongside another surgeon, a brilliant, haunted man named Dr. Nathan Gray. William had admired him immensely. They had become friends, confidants. After a particularly brutal battle at Gettysburg, Gray had broken. He'd walked away from medicine, from the war, from his own name, vanished. William had been devastated. He'd told Adelaide, if Nathan ever needs anything, anything at all, he knows where to find me, and I know where to find him. She looked at Nathaniel. at his hands, so steady during Grace's fever, at his knowledge of medicine that went far beyond a simple rancher, at the haunted look in his eyes that Rebecca had mentioned, the look she had seen in the eyes of Dr. Nathan Gray all those years ago. "It's you," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "You're Nathan Gray." Nathaniel didn't answer. He just looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the truth. The quiet rancher was a ghost, a man hiding from a past too terrible to face. And William, her William, had been his friend, his only link to a life he left behind. "Did he give it to you, Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did William give you his medical bag?" He finally nodded, his expression grim. "He brought it to me a week before he died. He said he was on to something dangerous and he needed me to hold it for him. He said it contained his life's work." It wasn't just a medical bag, it was a lockbox, a treasure chest, and inside almost certainly were William's journals. The proof they needed, the weapon that could destroy Victor Caldwell forever. The bag was at the ranch, hidden in a secret compartment beneath the floorboards of his study, a place only he and William knew about. They had to get back there. Now. But they weren't the only ones who knew Nathaniel's secret. Victor's words echoed in her mind. "You have something that belongs to me." He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to Nathaniel. He knew. Somehow he knew who Nathaniel was, and he knew about the bag. This wasn't a random confrontation. It was a targeted attack. The race was on. They couldn't risk taking the main road. Victor would be watching. Calvin knew another way, a winding cattle trail that cut across the prairie, hidden by the rolling hills. It would be slower, but safer. Rebecca insisted on keeping Grace with her. "She'll be safer here," she said, her voice firm. "Go. Get what you need. End this." Leaving Grace was the hardest thing Adelaide had ever done, but she knew Rebecca was right. This was too dangerous for a child. They rode hard, Calvin leading the way, his shotgun resting across his saddle. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the land. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every coyote's howl sent a shiver down her spine. The ranch was dark when they arrived. The silence was unsettling. Nathaniel dismounted, moving with a stealth that spoke of a past she was only just beginning to understand. He wasn't just a doctor. He had been a cavalry surgeon, a man who knew the rhythms of war. He motioned for them to stay back as he crept toward the house. He was a shadow against the darkness. He slipped inside. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Adelaide held her breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What was taking so long? Suddenly, a light flickered in the window of the study. A lamp. But Nathaniel had taken their only lantern. He wasn't alone. It was a trap. A gunshot shattered the night. The sound was deafening. Adelaide screamed. Calvin pulled her off her horse, shoving her behind the meager cover of a water trough. Another shot rang out from the house. Then silence. A terrible, profound silence. "Stay here," Calvin hissed, cocking his shotgun. He began to move toward the house, low and fast. But Adelaide couldn't stay put. Nathaniel was in there. Injured or worse. She scrambled after Calvin, her mind a numb haze of terror. The front door was ajar. They slipped inside, their eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The smell of gunpowder and spilled whiskey hung heavy in the air. The parlor was a wreck. A table was overturned, chairs smashed. And on the floor, in a pool of moonlight, lay a body. It was one of the thugs from the saloon. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. A dark stain was spreading across his chest. Of Victor and the other man, there was no sign, and no sign of Nathaniel. "Nathaniel!" she cried out, her voice echoing in the silent house. A weak groan answered her from the study. They rushed in. He was on the floor, slumped against the desk. His hand was pressed to his side and blood was seeping through his fingers. The floorboards beside him were ripped open, revealing an empty compartment. The bag was gone. Victor had been waiting for them. He had beaten them to it. "He took it," Nathaniel gasped, his face pale with pain. "They were waiting for me, knew right where to look." Victor had everything. The journals. The proof. And now he would disappear, leaving them with a dead body on their floor and a wounded man who might not survive the night. Justice was gone. Hope was gone. Victor had won. Adelaide fell to her knees beside Nathaniel, her nurse's training kicking in. She had to stop the bleeding. As she tore strips from her dress to make a bandage, her hand brushed against something in his pocket, a small, hard object. She pulled it out. It was a book, a small, leather-bound volume of poetry, the one he kept by his bed, the one she had found the letter in. But it wasn't a book. The cover was fake. It was a hollowed-out box. And inside, tucked into the carved-out pages, was a single, small black journal. Nathaniel's eyes flickered open. "Sophia's," he whispered. "She kept her own journal. I found it after she was gone. Never read it. Too painful." Adelaide's fingers trembled as she opened it. Sophia's delicate handwriting filled the pages. It was a record of her last months, her love for Grace, her quiet life on the ranch, and her growing fear of Victor Caldwell. The last entry was dated 2 days before she died. "Victor was here today," she wrote. "He came while N was in town. He was looking for William's journals. He said William had discovered something about the mine, something about salted claims. He threatened me. He said if I told anyone, he would make sure Nathaniel's past came back to haunt him. He knows he was Dr. Gray. He said he would ruin him, expose him as a deserter. He said he would take Grace. I am so afraid. I think he did something to William, and now I think he will do something to me." It was a confession from the grave, a testament to Victor's evil. But then Adelaide saw the last few lines, written in a shaky, fading script. "I gave him the wrong bag. William left too. The one with the journals is safe. I told Nathaniel's friend, the old soldier, the one who sees everything. I told Calvin where I hid it." Adelaide looked up, her eyes locking with Calvin's. The old man's face was a grim mask. He nodded slowly. "She gave it to me the day before she died," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Told me to keep it safe. Told me there would come a day when you'd need it." The bag wasn't gone. The journals weren't gone. They were safe. Victor had a decoy, and now they had him. They had the truth. Calvin retrieved the real bag from its hiding place in the hayloft of his own barn. It was heavy, filled with William's meticulous records. As Adelaide tended to Nathaniel's wound, a deep graze, painful but not life-threatening, Calvin rode like the devil himself was on his heels to get Deputy Miller. They laid the trap. When Miller and his men surrounded the saloon, Victor was inside, celebrating his victory. He was bragging about how he'd outsmarted the quiet rancher and the broken widow. When Miller presented him with Sophia's journal, the color drained from his face. When he showed him William's detailed logs of the salted claims, the evidence of fraud, the proof of murder, Victor Caldwell finally broke. He confessed to everything: sabotaging the mine supports to kill William, forging the contract to silence Adelaide, threatening Sophia, even poisoning her slowly with a tincture he'd passed off as a tonic for her postpartum recovery, a final, cruel act to remove the last person who suspected him. The town of Roe Creek was rocked by the revelations. The man they had known as a respectable businessman was a monster. The woman they had judged and pitied on the auction block was a hero. And the quiet rancher they had mostly ignored was the man who had protected her. Back at the ranch, healing began. Nathaniel's wound was physical, but Adelaide knew his other wounds, the ones from the war, were beginning to close as well. The secret he had carried for so long was out, but no one in Roe Creek cared that he had once been Dr. Nathan Gray. They only cared that he was Nathaniel Whitman, a good man who had fought for what was right. One evening, weeks later, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Grace slept peacefully in a cradle between them. The new foal, Hope, grazed in the pasture with her mother. The world was quiet, peaceful. "Sophia was right," Nathaniel said softly, his eyes on Adelaide. "She said you were the one who would be perfect for Grace, perfect for me." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm, steady. "She knew I needed someone to save me from my ghosts." Adelaide looked at their joined hands, at the home they had forged in the midst of chaos and secrets, at the beautiful baby who was the center of their world. Her own ghosts, the ones she had carried since the war, since William's death, were finally quiet. "I think," she said, her voice soft but sure, We saved each other. He squeezed her hand, a lifetime of promises in that simple gesture. The future was unwritten, a blank page stretching out before them like the vast Nebraska prairie. But for the first time in a very long time, it was a future filled not with fear, but with hope. They had found their way through the storm, together. If you enjoyed this story of secrets, survival, and a love that defied all odds, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter we have in store.